Welcome to episode number 5 of the Future of Leasing in Latin America Anchor in its past and present. This time we are going to talk about Central America. Remember that we are talking about granular information of Latin America in this episode number 5. Central America could have been, without the conquista, the Mayan Federation or the Mayan Confederation, a unique nation integrated by what today are 7 small economies that are in search of scale. Precisely because it is so fragmented, Central America has been unable to develop in general a manufacturing base. So let's talk a little bit of how we got there. Again, we have this indigenous population, very well advanced population in Mesoamerica. It was the integration of Mexico and what today is Central America. And we have probably one of the most advanced civilizations before the Spaniards came. And then we have the interest after the independence of the creation of a federal republic. Important to mention that during the colonization, Central America was gathered around the so-called Capitanía de Guatemala, which main purpose was to control the invasion of the British, the British pirates, but also became the place where the agricultural production and the food integration was created. So while the rest of the colonies were basically working in mining and extracting gold and silver, Central America was producing food. So what we have is this fragmentation that started when the Federal Republic, which was an original intent, dissolved in 1841. And that left economies from Guatemala with 18 million to Belize for 400,000 million people, none without industrial scale. Many tries to integration, the Central America Common Market, the system of integration for Central America, and what today is the CAFTA, the Central America Free Trade Agreement with the United States, are the only areas that to come back to this, let's call Mayan Federation. The economy today is fed by 4 pillars of unequal quality. The first pillar are remittances, which are currently weakened by the new policies of deportation driven by the United States. There are some light CAFTA manufacturing industry and agro exports using the privilege of CAFTA, also weakened by the tariffs created by the United States. And the real success apart is Costa Rica, that became a high technology medical device and chip manufacturer, as well as Panama, that has its strategic position as logistics center and also as tax haven, I would say, and financial haven. So the questions are 3. Is the proximity and CAFTA preference driver of a nearshoring opportunity? Can Central America fix the highest energy and logistic cost? And third, can it stem the drug traffic and immigration drain? These are the basic questions. So let's talk about Guatemala in particular. Guatemala is a very interesting country, the largest economy. As mentioned, the Capitanía de Guatemala was the main purpose. Guatemala has a very rich economy. Just to give you an idea, the coffee growers from Colombia learned the business in Guatemala. Nowadays, Guatemala has a scale without debt, has the largest economy in terms of population, which is around 18 million people. Remittances represent 19% of the gross domestic product, has a low tax take, but it has an important production based on agro exports, especially coffee, sugar, bananas, palm oil, and non-traditionals. And certain areas can feed nearshoring because of its proximity with Mexico. Remember that we were talking about the expansion of one of the lines of railways between Mexico, the southern Mexico and Guatemala, that will connect with the interoceanic, the Tetuantepec isthmus connection. The constraints that exist today is high energy and logistic cost, and scale will lean on Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador Customs Union. For the leasing standpoint, it's an interesting market in terms of fleet leasing, transportation that is currently replacing and renewing agri-machinery for agri-export and upgrade, and all other manufacturing for the CAFTA cycle. Then we move into Costa Rica, and Costa Rica is a very interesting country because it transitioned its economy from coffee to chips. Intel selected in 1997 Costa Rica as its important hub, and it's important to mention that many other countries in Latin America compete with them. But the winning factor was the high education level and the bilingual nature of the management class in Costa Rica. And that was due to the reform that was implemented in 1948 in Costa Rica, where the army was abolished and all the budget that was destinated to war was destinated to education. So Intel certainly started to show the potential to develop a cluster. That cluster evolved into more high-tech value, and a lot of medical devices nowadays are manufactured in Costa Rica. So still, Costa Rica has a very important talent pipeline. I would say that also the leasing industry in Costa Rica is highly sophisticated. It's a high-value leasing market. And even though there have been some scandals and dismissals like the Cifin demise in Costa Rica, nonetheless, it is a very important market, and the sophistication has been growing very, very much. Let's move into Panama. And when we talk about Panama, we will talk collaterally from other countries in Central America. We can talk about El Salvador, which is another interesting country that has received some interesting moves, but is very, very connected to Guatemala. So whatever development El Salvador can have is contingent of the development of Guatemala as well. Certainly, El Salvador adopted innovative points like the dollarization of the economy. I doubt that the Bitcoinization of the economy has really delivered positive results, but just the dollarization has been interesting. The success in defeating the insecurity and the gangs is undeniable, even though whether you like or not the president of El Salvador, but the outcome has been very positive. Let's talk about Panama, because Panama is a very interesting economy. Panama suffered different interesting points, but geographically, Panama has been important because it always was the hub for connection between the Atlantic Ocean and the Pacific Ocean. Before the construction of the Panama Canal, because of the isthmus, it was easier to connect between the Pacific and the Atlantic, and that was the reason why we are going to talk about that, why the railway in Panama, between the United States and Panama, the Panama Railway in 1855 was built in order to facilitate the gold fever that was happening in California. A lot of people moved from New York to California using the connection in Panama, using the railway. It was a very interesting point, and it brought investment into Panama, 1855. So Panama nowadays, because it has this dollarized economy, because it is free of taxes, because it has a free international banking system, is a big ticket leasing market. It plays a role that in Europe has been played by Ireland. And during the times of the boom of cross-border leasing in many countries, like for example, what happened in Colombia in the 1990s, when the double taxation system was removed for cross-border leases, Panama was one of the main centers of cross-border lessors. So Panama has this advantage. It can also funnel a lot of cross-border leases into the rest of Latin America from there. Currently, Panama has a very sophisticated service industry, especially in the banking sector, the legal sector, logistics. But it has, and we are going to see that, certain threats that are related to climate, to the excessive development of trade flows, and of course, the circulation of the Panama Canal. So let's talk about the specifics of that. You can see these pictures show what Panama is all about. Of course, the process of the creation of the Panama Canal is one of the big stories that are interesting to mention. And why is that? Because if we go back to the colonial times, Panama was the Camino Real and Portobello fairs. Portobello was one of the most important ports of the Americas. And that was one of the main places where the silver that came from Peru especially was shipped to the Atlantic or to the Pacific, wherever you want to see. We talked in the past about the connection between Mexico and China through Philippines. Here we can talk about also the possibility to send silver from Panama to the Pacific Ocean. But essentially, Portobello was a port in the Atlantic Ocean, and it went basically to Spain. Then, as mentioned, the Panama Railroad facilitated the connectivity of the members of the gold rush. It was a boom of Americans moving from the East Coast to the West Coast and vice versa, carrying gold and carrying dreams of gold. And because of the existence of the isthmus, once Mr. Ferdinand de Lesseps finished the Suez Canal in Egypt, then he thought that it was a good idea to follow his success in building the Panama Canal. The problem is that he was a little bit mistaken, because there was a difference between building a canal in the desert and another one building in the jungle. And he paid the price for that, to the point that his company broke, went into bankruptcy, and more than 22,000 deaths happened in people that were trying to build the Panama Canal. But that bankruptcy was purchased by another interesting character called Philippe Bunau-Varilla, which made an important contribution. At the time when the Panama Canal was a project from the French, the Americans were discussing the possibility to build a connection between the Atlantic and the Pacific through Nicaragua. It was the connectivity of the San Juan River in Nicaragua that had less inconvenience than the inconvenience that had the Panama Canal. But the point is that when they were in that discussion about Nicaragua, then Mr. Bunau-Varilla arrives in the United States, now owning the bankrupt Panama Canal company that founded Mr. de Lesseps. And he retained the services of the lawyer William Nelson Cromwell, who lobbied the Congress and convinced the Congress that it was a better idea for the United States to buy and keep building the Panama Canal rather than going into opening the Nicaraguan way. So the famous Hepburn bill was reversed, and then the Spooner Act was approved in 1902. And that was followed by an interesting story where Mr. Bunau-Varilla midwifed the Panama secession from Colombia in 1903 with the U.S. naval backing, and signing away the canal zone before any Panamanian reached Washington. So he took care. He was appointed as ambassador from Panama. He took care of signing all the treaties that created the Panama Canal zone that eventually was returned to Panama in 1999. So now the canal today, and it's important, the story of the Panama Canal, because the Panama Canal drives a lot of business for leasing. Everything that goes into that logistics, the logistic chains, the ships, the containers, everything, the intermodal transportation is part of what the leasing companies can create. So we have a situation that the Panama Canal is very well managed by the Autoridad del Canal de Panamá, the ACP, very well managed. And nowadays it has it expanded its capacity to what is called the Neo-Panamax expansion. So nowadays there is a lot of trade in liquefied natural gas, large containers, and so on. So this is the good news. The bad news is nature. There is a throat, the Gatun Lake, which is basically the provider of water for the canal to be able to transport ships, got a crisis between 2023 and 2024 because started to dry. And there is a structural situation with this Gatun River. So it is necessary to invest in the construction of the Rio Indio reservoir and draw more water so that the Panama Canal can support its point. So it's important to understand that the Panama Canal is facing up to 2032 an a hydrological risk, and that also could drive interesting investments that could be funded by leasing. So the new geography of interoceanic transit provides different alternatives and complement. We talk about the Tehuantepec rail corridor in Mexico that is already working, is one alternative to that, and of course it could be a competition to the Panama Canal, or could be complementary. The Nicaraguan canal certainly collapsed. The Rio San Juan River is no longer a viable alternative. The alternative that was considered was mismanaged, and the Chinese are not interested in that. But the Arctic and the Cape are two alternatives because with the melting of the poles, now it's easier to circulate, and Canada is using that route now as an alternative to connect with China and all the countries in the Far East. So this is something that needs to be taken into account. The Panama Canal life is not forever, and we need to diversify the economy before that's over. We need to take advantage of the logistics platform. For many, many years, the Colón Free Zone became the hub for many distributors of equipment in many countries. I remember when I was working with the Canon leasing company, Canon had a large warehouse system where they brought from Japan all the fax machines and copiers that were sold to the rest of Latin America. And it was very easy for any of the countries once to complete the shipment when they sold the equipment to get that in 1 or 2 days to be delivered into their countries. So this is something that still exists, and Panama has that additional advantage.